пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным.
It is now 243 days since Russian President Vladimir Putin announced an all-out invasion of its former Soviet territory, Ukraine, by sea, land and air. This conflict has killed more than 29,916 people and displaced more than 10 million. The exact cause of the invasion turned full-blown-out conflict remains a puzzle. It depends on which side one wants to believe.
Россия и безопасность наших граждан для нас безусловна.
This is not a question of blocks. This is not a question of diplomatic power games. It's a matter of life and death.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
However, what is not in doubt is that the conflict has reverberated across the globe and has had far-reaching implications, especially in developing countries long beholden to Western foreign aid.
The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
Last week, on October 12th, Uganda, yet again, voted to abstain on the UN General Assembly resolution to condemn last month's public referendum organized by Russia in the occupied Ukrainian regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. 143 countries voted to condemn Moscow for the illegal annexation of the Ukrainian regions, while 35 countries, including Uganda, abstained. Russia, alongside Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Nicaragua, voted against the resolution.
Against 5, abstentions 35.
Uganda has vowed to remain neutral on all resolutions regarding the matter since the first General Assembly vote in March, called by the UN Security Council, the world body's most powerful organ, to reprimand Russia for the invasion. Uganda says the move is for strategic decisions, and which saw the U.S. President Joe Biden, top envoy to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and Russia's Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov visit Kampala a week apart in July and August respectively. Uganda, as the incoming chair of the non-aligned movement, diplomatic sources maintain, will continue to abstain on any contentious Russian vote.
Uganda has not changed that position because we believe that that is a justified position in this conflict. And we believe that this conflict should not have taken place if both parties to the conflict and others who were interested in the conflict had been listening to each other. Therefore, because it could escalate and have far-reaching impact as it is now on others, non-players, we continue urging and remaining and voting, in a neutral position, meaning that, we want both parties and all parties to encourage political dialogue and diplomatic engagement in order for this matter to be resolved in a most peaceful way.
It is also, sources affirm, a balancing act of attempting to placate two powerful global players. Sources also affirm a case of learning from blindly causing with the West in the past. Uganda, a key ally of Washington in the restive Great Lakes region, was one of the few countries to support the President George Bush administration invasion of Iraq in March 2002. The American external spy body, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, claimed that then Iraqi strongman Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be false. Later on October 12, 2003, President Museveni admitted that he blindly backed the American invasion of Iraq. I quote, "I supported the Americans in Iraq, but I did not even know what they were fighting for." End quote. Museveni, who 5 years earlier had been touted by Bush's predecessor Bill Clinton as among the handful of new breed of African leaders, said while inaugurating the Senior Staff and Command College in Chimaka, Jinja, I quote, What I knew is that Saddam Hussein was a friend of Bashir, and Bashir was my enemy, end quote, he added. There was a time between 1995 to around 2012 when President Museveni and now former Sudanese strongman Omar Hassan Ahmed al-Bashir could not see eye to eye. At the height of the tensions in 1995, Uganda drove military tanks into the Sudanese embassy in Kampala and diplomatic ties were severed. As a continuation of the West Russia standoff over Ukraine, this week Kampala settled for the middle road position, siding with Saudi Arabia and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries OPEC, which is proposing to reduce crude oil production by 2 million barrels per day to avoid a supply glut. Highly placed diplomatic sources told NTV that Kampala was compelled to take sides owing to the frantic below-the-radar lobbying by both sides. The State Minister for International Relations, Henry Okello Oryem, justified the move.
Every country should be independent of taking its own decision based on its own interests. Uganda should be able to take decisions that protect and promote its interests. We similarly think on the Saudi Arabia situation, where Saudi Arabia is under a lot of pressure to reduce oil and crude production. There's not only Saudi Arabia who is responsible, this is OPEC. So the pressure should not be only on Saudi Arabia, it should be also on other OPEC countries. But more importantly, Saudi Arabia should have the independence and the right to take its own decisions without influence from outside on matters that promote and protect its interests.
He said the U.S. pressure towards Saudi Arabia is misdirected.
So if they so choose that there should not be an increase in production, rather there should be a reduction in production of the crude, it should be respected. Because Saudi Arabia, I am sure, has taken this decision based on economic and commercial considerations. They are best placed to know whether to increase production or not increase production of crude. And they've done it many times at strategic times and at strategic points in their history. So for those who are ignorant of how oil is produced, and for those who do not know the history or how Saudi Arabia has been led for many years, and for those who are ignorant of the universal factors outside their countries, it's unfair for them to put such pressures on Saudi Arabia when it's simply just doing something to protect its national interests.
OPEC is an exclusive club of 13 oil-producing countries, including Saudi Arabia, Libya, United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and the Republic of the Congo. The 13 countries account for 44% of the global oil production and 73% of the world's proven oil reserves, hence OPEC's enormous influence on global oil prices that were previously determined by American multinational oil companies. A loose group, OPEC Plus, which includes Russia, was formed in 2016 with other top non-OPEC oil exporting nations to exert more control over the price of crude oil. OPEC Plus controls more than 50% of global oil supplies and about 90% of global oil reserves. While the United States ranks among countries with enormous oil reserves in the league of OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, it has often sought to control the global supply of oil in favor of its own interests. On October 5th, the OPEC Plus countries announced plans to impose deep output cuts starting next month, a move they say is intended to stabilize prices of Brent crude oil, currently trading at $8 per barrel. The decision immediately rattled the Biden administration, which has threatened sanctions against Saudi Arabia, which rallied other OPEC Plus members.
The reason why gas prices are up is because of Russia.
With a winter coming and amid soaring inflation, the scaling back of the supply of crude was interpreted by Washington as a stab in the back of Saudi Arabia ahead of the critical midterm elections. There are fears that this may be the tipping point for the global economy on the brink of recession and push fuel prices to soar in the U.S. and in Europe, which is already facing high energy costs after Russia cut off supplies.
We stand to have a tremendous impact, economic impact, if oil production is based on political consideration rather than economic consideration. And that's why we stand by Saudi Arabia and members of OPEC that oil production should be based on economic basis and commercial basis rather than political basis.
As a cartel, the OPEC Plus member states mutually agree on how much oil to produce, which in effect has a bearing on the supply of crude oil on the global market at any given time. Historically, crude oil prices have seen increases in times when OPEC production targets are reduced. The extent to which OPEC member states utilize their available production capacity is often used as an indicator of the tightness of global oil markets, as well as an indicator of the extent to which OPEC is exerting upward influence on prices. From 2003 to 2008, OPEC's total spare capacity remained near or below 2 million barrels per day, or less than 3% of the global supply, which provided very little cushion for fluctuations in supply in a context of rapidly rising demand. As such, markets are influenced by geopolitical events within and between OPEC Plus states because they have, historically, resulted in reductions in oil production. The OPEC Plus club first mooted cutting back on daily production in 2020 to deal with the disruption occasioned by the COVID-19 lockdowns, but the U.S. nipped it in the bud. Uganda, which maintains bilateral relations with both the West and Eastern capitals, is always watching the mood of all the large geopolitical players.
We engage the American ambassador regularly. She's in touch with us closely. As I said earlier on, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations was with us more recently. If there's need for further engagement, when we're in the UN, by the way, and the UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, we had the opportunity also to engage them more. And Minister J.J. Odong even went to Washington and had a meeting with the State Department on these matters. So they know where our position stands very clearly, the United States of America.
President Museveni has recently pilloried Western countries for what he called arrogance and said China and Russia were available as alternatives because they do not meddle in the internal politics of other countries, hence abstaining on key votes involving Moscow and Beijing. However, Museveni remains a key ally of the West, which was underlined by U.S. Ambassador to the UN in August, especially for running military errands in the restive Great Lakes region from DRC to Somalia. He is currently nursing ambitions to send troops to West Africa in Mali to take on Islamist militias.
We talk to everyone on this continent, and my view is, and I think that's a broad view of the U.S. government, that you have to engage with all leaders on this continent. And it is in those engagements that we can talk about the things that we have in common with each other, but we can also talk about those issues that are of concern to us. And we don't hesitate to raise those concerns with any government that we are engaging with. So we don't speak in tongues. We're speaking very clearly that the U.S. values are very well known. We make clear that we value human rights. We make clear that we value democracy. We make clear that we value your right, every single one of you, your right to a free press without being harassed by governments. You may not sit in the room when we're having those conversations with governments, but we're very clear on our position, and this is a position that starts at the top.
It is on this premise that the West has routinely turned a blind eye on the government's indiscretions, especially poor human rights record. Museveni continues to rely on adroitness to navigate the delicate terrain as he continues to craft alliances with Washington, the EU, China and Moscow.